Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Self Care Summit. Today is day 2. And if you've been hanging out with us, you already know the guest expert talks this week are bringing in so much gold and wisdom to help you transform your stress and take your life to the next level. This month's theme is all about self confidence and self love. This is my birthday week, so I decided to lead a summit with things that I have personally struggled with in my own life because I know how much emotional suffering it can bring to your everyday when you don't feel so good about yourself. So today we are talking all about self worth. Now, remember to get the replays and all the links that we talk about in these presentations, make sure to register at aditicreative.com/summit, and you will get the replays and all the goods. So today's topic is the BS of self-worth. It's all just brain stories. We have Jocelyn Brady coming in today, who is a professional brain coach. First of all, I didn't even know that was a thing until I met Jocelyn, and I am so intrigued and amused by how powerful this work is. So I'm really excited to hear myself all the wisdom and the golden nuggets that Jocelyn is going to be sharing with us today. So Jocelyn is a professional brain coach, and she helps big dreaming leaders master their brain stories so they can find more joy, prosperity, purpose, and sweet, sweet flow. I love that. So, welcome, Jocelyn. I'm going to bring you on here to say hello to everybody.
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me. This is wonderful.
So much fun. So, tell us, Jocelyn, why is this such an important topic?
Yeah, I mean, the stories we tell ourselves, the brain stories are everything in how we process information, how we make sense of the world, how we interact, behave, and what we think is possible. The brain makes sense of the world by making up stories and telling stories. So if we're not telling healthy stories about ourselves and others, guess what? We're not going to be treating ourselves and others in a healthy way. So I just think it's the most crucial. Obviously, I became a brain coach because I'm obsessed with how we tell stories and how much power we have to flip the script when they're not healthy and in service of the kind of life and human we want to be.
That's so powerful. And I love what you said about the brain actually helps us make sense of the world. So it really is kind of our identity, our reflection, how we see things, how we interpret things, how we act, how we show up in the world. Super powerful. So, how did you get into this work and why are you so passionate about it?
Well, I'll get into a bit more of that, but in short, again, because I've always loved stories and always been fascinated by the brain. I remember as a kid, we had to dissect a fetal pig, and we looked at all the organs. You know, you understand a lot about things by breaking it open, right? And we took out all the organs, but looking at the brain was not part of the assignment. And I'm like, this is crazy. I want to see the thing that's like powering all of this other stuff. So I, much to the chagrin, I'm sure, of my partner, one of my best friends, Nova, was like, I'm cutting into the brain, and that's what I did, just so I could see it, because it was so fascinating to me. Um, and it took, many years, and a lot of things happened over those years, which again I'll get into more detail about. But I really just saw the power of how we can literally change our brain by the stories we're telling. And it helps us be, again, healthier, happier, more productive, playful, better collaborators. It has applications across everything, how we work, how we show up, again, how we live our lives.
So good. I love that you're like, show me the brain though. I want to see the brain.
Yeah.
So, why do we struggle with self worth?
Uh, One of the reasons I think is we have a lot of us, I mean, we've all gone through some kind of turbulence and trauma, and we don't necessarily have a good way of expressing it, a good way of understanding when hard things happen, when we're immersed in chaos, we can tend to internalize it as somehow our fault. We cast a lot of judgment. This is good. This is bad.
Mm,
You know, we just did in my last Tiny Tips, which is a series about the stories we tell and how we can improve them. We can see fire as inherently bad and try to squash out all the fires we ever see ever, but that weakens the entire system. Um, so we get so attached to our stories and definitions that they cause a lot of pain and grief. And again, without these tools to express them in a healthy way, we just kind of bottle them up and lash out and lack self-awareness and self-compassion. And in a society that encourages the accumulation of things, status and power, that costs us
mm,
our ability to be self-compassionate, and self-worth is intertwined with that.
beautiful. So tell us, Jocelyn, what is the BS of self worth and it all being brain stories? I'm going to pass the mic on to you.
Right. So, as I mentioned, I'm obsessed with the brain and storytelling. It took a while for these things to really come together, and I'll tell you how. But I've been immersed in a storytelling rich culture, and a dad who was an incredibly wonderful, is not past tense, an incredibly wonderful storyteller, musician. Just he can tell stories across instruments, including his voice. And he used to tell stories about playing with the Beach Boys and meeting Charlie Manson. He was not impressed. Running into OJ Simpson before literally running through a wall. He just had the greatest stories, and I really looked up to and appreciated that. But those are stories for another day. So I loved language and stories so much that I eventually went on to pursue and get my MFA in creative nonfiction writing, a degree that guarantees nothing. I loved it. I loved learning more. I wanted to be a better storyteller. I was fascinated by true stories well told. And I really wanted to be able to do that. And there's a quote from the program that just stuck with me, and that is from Joan Didion. And she says, "We tell ourselves stories in order to live." But I'm thinking, what if those stories, the stories we tell ourselves, our brain stories, are killing us? I'm going to tell you how I went from someone who told herself stories that literally made her sick. I was full of shame and anxiety, and I didn't know how to express it, to someone who was able to flip the script and fell in love with the stage, started a stand-up comedy and storytelling show with comedians who went on to Conan and Colbert and Comedy Central. I started training multinational teams for multi-billion dollar companies on how to be better storytellers. And ultimately, what I do today, which is as a brain coach, helping people's brains tell better stories so they can lead happier, healthier lives. I think I'll also weave in a little acronym for you so you can, spoiler alert, act on what you hear today. So, a bit of my story. I was born near an Arctic tundra, Canada, Halifax, Nova Scotia, near an Arctic tundra. Raised on an active volcano. So, you might say I'm set up for navigating through extremes, but that would just be a story. I moved to the Big Island of Hawaii when I was 7 after my parents split. And after that family eruption, we got the news. Me and my dad, it was April Fool's Day, 1990. The lava is erupting, Kilauea volcano is erupting. You need to evacuate. Not a joke. we didn't know anybody. This was just a few months after we moved there. We didn't know where to go. So we ended up going to a homeless shelter. And we got on welfare. We got on food stamps. Eventually, we got Section 8 housing, government assistant housing, so we could find a new home. And, despite being in poverty, uh, we lived in amazing places. At one point, I was living on a cliff next to the ocean, and every day would go out and just stare across it and imagine myself communicating with the whales and dolphins and turtles. And they were a lot easier to communicate with, I thought, than people. And despite that, despite having a dad who was incredibly supportive and encouraged me to pursue my curiosity, which was exploring and writing and creating and making stuff, especially stories, despite having a mom who flew 5,000 miles from Ottawa to the Big Island every year to see me. Her friends used to ask her how she could afford such a luxurious lifestyle traveling to Hawaii, and she would just retort, "I don't remodel my kitchen every year." It was hard on them. But as a kid, I didn't understand all of this, and I just felt incredibly uncertain, anxious, unstable, like the ground could always be swept out from beneath me. I internalized this turbulence as somehow my fault. And they say that shame is feeling that you are wrong, that your whole being is wrong, versus guilt, which is feeling like you did something wrong, a bad action. It was shame. I thought that bad things happened. They were my fault. I am bad. I would turn stories, create stories, give significance to signifiers. They became these devices that brought more shame. Be careful what you attach your stories to. Food stamps, one of them. I hated it. I didn't want to show anyone because to me, they were a symbol of the poverty, which was a symbol that I was an impoverished person, which meant that I did not matter. We had a blue card to get discounted free school lunches and bus passes. And I remember wanting to hide that card because everybody knew what it meant. And I thought I knew what everybody was thinking. That means you're a loser. Turns out you can't ever know what's going on in somebody else's brains, but I didn't know that. And I would stash away. I would collect coins from the ground, from seat cushions. I would just try to gather up as much change as I could so that sometimes I could pay for this bus pass or pay for my school lunch just so people wouldn't see me take out the blue card and I could pretend that I fit in to this cultural story about what it looks like to matter. Um, this would cost me for a long time. In the 5th grade, I took on a new signifier for my worth, and that was getting good grades. And I did. I was a diligent student. I was a really good student, straight A's. But I was handing over my worth once again, this time to teachers. What letter will they give me to demonstrate that I matter, that I'm doing a good job? I'm good. I knew I was in trouble when the assignment came. Again, 5th grade, the teacher, we were learning about autobiographies, and the teacher said, "All right, class, everyone's going to write a story, write a story about yourself, and then you're going to come in and read it in front of the class." Oof. I tried not to think about that last part, but I poured myself into writing this story. And by this time, I was 10. I was already a really avid storyteller. Sometimes it was harder for me to make good friends and express myself, but I found solace in books, sometimes reading 3 books in a day and constantly writing. I had this Tandy computer, was just pouring out stories. I was published in Highlights magazine at 9. but I still didn't think I could tell a story to people in a room. That's crazy talk. Um, Still, I poured my heart into making that story as best as I could with a creeping sense of anxiety every day that it got closer and closer to having to tell it in front of the class. Oh, I didn't know if I could do it. And I remember the kid before me, Doug. He was a transplant from Texas, and he had this charming Southern drawl and so much charisma and swagger, and he just got up and owned the stage. A room full of fifth graders, but still, he seemed like this hero to me. And I just compared my insides to his outsides and thought, I can't follow this. There's no way. I scuttled back to the teacher's desk and I just looked down. I averted her gaze and I was trembling and I gave her my paper and I just said, I can't read it. She's like, why not? I couldn't answer her. So I just tried to choke back tears and handed it to her, shook my head, scuttled back to my desk, and just put my head into my arms. And I just felt these hot tears streaming into the crevices of my elbows. I was a loser. I didn't even get a grade, a good grade. As the teacher had said, if you can't do this part of the assignment, I'm going to have to fail you here. You'll get a C if your paper's an A. That just crushed me. But my fear of showing up, of being me, was stronger than my desire to get an A and the teacher's approval. Again, this would continue to cost me because I looked away. I stuffed it down. I did not want to see this. I did not want to face my fear. It was really painful and scary. Plus, I wasn't aware, really, that these were just stories I was making up that I could change. That's the first letter in the acronym ACT, by the way, awareness. You have to bring awareness. You can't change something you're unaware of or unwilling to see. So this awareness and acceptance, it came to a head when I had to travel to New York for my first business trip. I was running my company, Scribe, and working with these CMOs and agency CEOs and very important people with very fancy titles who I was incredibly intimidated by. And mind you, I was creating brand voices for these multi-billion-dollar brands. I still did not believe in my own worth. I had even taken theater so I could get up on stage and tell other people's stories. I'd still get nervous, but I was way more comfortable pretending to be somebody else, saying somebody else's lines. So going to this business meeting where I had to be in a room of people looking at me, oh my God, all these feelings of being back in that classroom just surged back. And this imposter feeling, this feeling that I was a loser, all of it. I couldn't hide anymore because at this point, we would get on phone calls when we had to interact. When I would get on the call with people, I'm in Portland, Oregon, and they were in New York and London, I could hide. I was just on the phone. I could press mute when I wasn't asked a question. So I could gather my breath. They wouldn't hear my voice tremble. Unmute, answer, mute. Now I couldn't hide. I worked myself up into such a state. I was so incredibly anxious and pent up. My brain was full of all of these stories that said alert to the rest of my body, and I got sick. I gave myself a case of hemorrhoids, and my hair was falling out. My BS, my brain stories were a literal pain in the ass. And that's when I finally realized the awareness. I have to do something about this. This is crazy. I can't live like this. Literally, this is killing me. I thought, what's the scariest thing I can imagine doing? And that was being on a stage in front of people talking naked. Not literally naked. I mean, I don't even know if I could get paid for that, but just being myself and Okay, well, I think I'll sign up for improv. Huh. Awareness and acceptance. The second letter, choosing a new direction, choosing a new direction, choosing a new story. I wanted to tell a new story. And I knew at this point that your brain can change because my dad had had a stroke just a few years prior to this. He lost his ability to speak, and long story short, regained it, could tell his stories, could tell me that annoying phrase, I'll tell you the rest of this story when you're older. And I saw firsthand that even a physically damaged brain, even a brain that had experienced incredible trauma that was broken, could rebuild, could reconnect, could change. I dove into neuroplasticity so I could understand this as best I could. And I understood that it's possible. You can rewire. You can rewire from your thoughts and your actions. So the awareness, choosing a new direction, and taking action. Because you can think you want to be somewhere else, but you have to take consistent action to reinforce these new neural pathways. So back to improv. I signed up to that one night. Immediately thought, this is the worst decision I have ever made. I need to get out of this. I thought, how can I make an excuse? What can I tell the teacher to get out of this so I could run away and hide and not have to face this and not have to get in front of the class? Whew, I just drove down. I remember driving downtown. Oh, I was so nervous, just feeling trembling, parking the car, resisting every step forward, thinking up until walking through that door, I can't go in there. I can't do this. This is crazy. But no, I knew I wanted to make a change. And right up until about 10 minutes after walking through the door, I was anxious. But then the class started and all of that stuff, all of my BS, my brain stories just melted away. All of that anxiety and shame and that stuff I was clinging to, those lies I was telling myself, they were gone, at least for the moment. Because in improv, you have to be fully present. One of the things you learn in a style of improv is don't think. And for a chronic overthinker, I thought that was hilarious. How can you ever possibly get out of your head? Well, you get out of your head by getting into action, being in the moment. Another thing you do in improv is go out to make your scene partner look good. You're there to support them. It's not about you. Because when you do that, you can create and build something magical together. That's not always great. I mean, we've seen a lot of bad improv, but still you're creating, you're letting go of judgment, you're being present in the moment. You're consistently choosing a new direction and consistently taking action. So that one night of improv for me turned into 4 years. And that turned into me starting up that stand-up comedy storytelling show. And I started applying these skills into training these multinational marketing teams how to tell better stories. And my confidence grew. And I started falling in love with facilitating and being in front of a room of people. I never thought this would happen. But something was still missing because I realized when I would get out of these workshops, I would see these moments, people would experience that much like I felt in improv, where all this other BS would melt away and they would be laughing and present and having such a good time and loose in flow, collaborating, connecting. And then these old stories, old habits would catch up to them because they weren't taking consistent action. They were falling back into old grooves. And a lot of them were living according to somebody else's story, a story that was not aligned to what they wanted. And they felt like they couldn't express themselves. In a lot of these corporate cultures, people were getting sick. They thought the only way to show up was to grind 9 to 5 minimum. You come in, you do not talk about your feelings, you do not tell people when you're sick. One of them had cancer, would not talk about it, made excuses for going to the doctor. One person was hospitalized not once, but multiple times for overwork and exhaustion. That's when I realized awareness. I didn't want to help brands tell better stories so they could sell. I wanted to help brains tell better stories so people could live well, because this was crazy. This lack of belief in your own story and showing up for yourself kills you. So that's when I decided to get into brain coaching. I enrolled in a program at Neuro Leadership Institute, and I wanted to learn how to apply all this stuff because, at this point, I knew the power of stories. I saw it attract 5 million people to this brand movement and close these multi-billion-dollar deals. It was insane. The power of story is insane. It's everything, but also the power of a brain to change itself. So how could I bring these together? And in this program, I could learn how to apply it. How when you change your story, you bring awareness to it, you choose a new direction, you take consistent action, and you're literally changing the connections in your brain, which is changing how you see, how you show up, how you're wired, how anxious you are or calm you are, how resilient you are, how you see the world. Still, I hid that for 4 years. I brain coached in private, in secret, because at this point, my business was going really well. I was now calling myself a CEO because before I didn't know how to title myself and was intimidated. And running these, training programs, it was pretty comfortable. It would take another eruption for me to flip the script. And that eruption came in the form of a global pandemic we call COVID. That came and all of my brand contracts gone. Bye-bye. Did you say you're bored, Jocelyn? Did you say you're burnt out on this? Bye. So I thought, well, I guess now I'm starting over, ground zero, time to find a new place to live. But this time, instead of seeing just destruction everywhere, instead of internalizing this as somehow my fault, as if I could cause a global pandemic, I realized that just like the lava comes, it destroys, it takes things away, but it's also at the same time creating new land and new room for opportunity, for things to grow, for things to thrive. That is life, ever changing. You get to decide how you see it. So I decided to see this as a new opportunity and for me to finally own what I really wanted to be doing. So I had, again, become aware. I wanted to help brains tell better stories. I saw the value of it. I would see clients, and one of them, he was so burnt out and bored with his career. He wanted 3 things. He wanted a new career, a good woman, and a comfortable income. And we worked together. Again, it takes consistent action. So over multiple sessions, over a few months, he was able to flip his script. He got into real estate. He sold 8 houses within a few months of us working together. He's now up 6 figures, and he's been living with his girlfriend of 4 years. I can't promise any of this stuff. I cannot promise results like that. That's crazy. It's actually a story that I find pretty infuriating in a lot of marketing because you never know what's going to happen. The eruption comes, the volcano does what it wants. You can't predict it. But I can promise when you learn how to tell better brain stories, new possibilities open up because you learn how to see them. You learn how to trust yourself. So if we tell ourselves stories in order to live, why don't we tell ourselves brain stories that help us live happier, healthier lives? So we could create, experience more of what we really want. We have to act, become aware, and accept where we are, be compassionate, choose a new direction, take consistent action. It's like Shakespeare said, joy's soul lies in the doing. We get out of our heads and we get into flow. So, my question for all of you today is, what is the story you want to live to tell? You get to choose it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Yay. Oh, girl, you had me tearing up and choking up right there with you as you were telling those stories. Oh, so powerful. So, if anyone has questions, feel free to put it in the chat box, in the Zoom, in the Facebook, in the wherever you're watching from. A few things that I definitely wanted to touch on that I was taking notes too as you were talking. Oh my gosh, so much good stuff. Um, one of the quotes that you had said was, we tell ourselves stories in order to live. And I found that to be very profound. And then what if our stories are killing us? Oh my God. It also reminds me of Dr. Joe Dispenza. He talks a lot about if certain thoughts can cause us stress and make us sick, then what if our thoughts can also make us well? And it reminds me of that so much. And I love what you said about, and it's crazy that you transitioned from marketing to helping people live well, because I did too. And it's like literally we're in the same boat with that. And it's so fascinating that we can use the same tools to actually improve our lives. And I love what you said about, I wanted to help brains tell better stories so people can live better. I want to emphasize that because I don't think people in general really realize how much the stories that we're telling ourselves impact our lives so deeply. It affects everything. And the fact that your brain stories can actually kill you, like what? That just brings a whole a level of awareness for myself and everyone watching, that like, wow, like I should really pay attention to what I'm telling myself on a daily basis. Be careful what you attach your stories to. I love that. And I like what you said about, you can get out of your head by being in the moment, because I think we are always so in our head all the time, especially in this social media age of distraction. We're always on our phones, we're always watching something, but and then it's like our brain stories can get affected by all of that we are digesting as well. So let's see. One question I want to start off with is, how long does it take to shift our brain stories and essentially our self-worth?
Oh, that is an excellent question. It's different for everybody. I mean, it's a combination of how deeply is this stuff embedded. Because again, if you're not even, some people aren't yet aware of what the story is. That's often part of the work in brain coaching, because what we do, it's also known as results based coaching, which is easier sell probably to businesses. Because you'll go after some kind of goal, so you have something a little more tangible, although I often call them dumb goals, because I think people should go after more ideals and what is the state of being you want to have, because this is ever changing. If you just go after achieving a goal and getting it done, then what? Then you become somebody who just chases things and are never satisfied where you are. So it's the process of bringing that stuff to awareness. And then once you're aware of it, you have and can accept it, also key, because sometimes you look at these stories you're telling yourself and you start judging them. You're like, oh my God, I'm such an idiot. I tell myself this, or
Right
I'm so
here.
mean. Yeah. And it's common, right? We start like,
The
we're
judgment is the
supposed to be,
worst. How do we deal with
yeah.
that part, in fact, since you're bringing that up too?
Yeah. I mean, it's just even being aware of that. Just, I've noticed that I'm judging my own story, but I'm being a human. If I want to continue to experience pain, then I can continue judging. Obviously, I don't want that. I mean, I guess unless you're a masochist or sociopath or something, probably not good options. Um, then, going, okay, I'm judging it. How can, even if you don't believe a completely flipped script, as it were, if you can't go from I'm a loser to I'm a wonderful person who's
Oh my
trying my best.
gosh. Yeah.
then maybe you can just get to the middle, right? Just neutral, just neutralize it.
Yes.
Neutralize the judgment to just be like, I am a person. That's true. Brain can't argue with that. Because the news stories, your brain's going to resist them because that's what it knows, right? It's carved this neural pathway oftentimes over decades. So it does not happen easily. It does not happen overnight. It's like you're not going to all of a sudden have the best oral hygiene if you flossed one tooth one day, but the rest of your life you just, sucked on a sugar rock. So it's going to take that consistent effort and time, patience with yourself. So you could start seeing changes really within weeks, just like anything. If you're lifting weights, you start to see, you feel different, you notice that things are changing, but you have to stick with it over time. So yeah, it can take, for me, it took many, many years. I wasn't looking at my own stories. I just, internalized this stuff and decided, no, I'm just an anxious person who isn't worth anyone's time. Ugh. Wouldn't wish that on anybody.
And what
Uh,
story that is, right?
Right. And now just being like, I'm just a person who, it's okay to just show up and not know stuff and not know what I'm going to say. It's like you just learn to trust yourself more.
I love that. I'm just a person. So bringing it into neutral first, because your brain is going to resist the new stories. And let's talk about that actually. I'm really glad you brought it up because resistance is a huge one. And I find that a lot too, especially when we're doing the work from going to where you are to where you want to be. And then there's this kind of like cognitive dissonance too between the two parts of you. So what do you do with that resistance? Because I feel like that's really important because the resistance is often where we want to quit. We're like, this is too hard. I can't do this. Who am I to think that I can be this? Like, who am I kidding? All of that. So, what can we do about the resistance and how can we work through that?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the sayings is what you resist persists. So it's like if you keep resisting something, you're giving it strength. Or if you're like pushing against a rock wall, it's not going to go anywhere. You're just going to get tired. Um, so and the other way to think about it is I think like resistance training, for example. So if you're the resistance, if you persevere through it, through patience, letting go of all your judgment if you can, um, you'll get stronger. But if you give up, you won't. It takes some breaking down to break things open and allow for some growth. So in that analogy, right? You're lifting weights. So the only way out is through and all of that. You just have to keep going through and understanding that it's part of it. Um, Often there's a really great book called The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. And often that's all we see, right? We just see the object that's in our way. Just a story, by the way, because we think the world should bend to our wills and wishes and it should go a certain way. And why aren't things easier? Well, if everything was super easy, we would just dissolve into a pile of mush and life would be very boring, is my judgment. So we sometimes just see the object in our way and we start judging it and we're just like banging our head against it. But if we're not like just taking a step back, just releasing for a moment, you start to see, oh, maybe there's a little tunnel over here. Or maybe I could, use some leverage and prop this stick up to move the rock out of the way. And there's all kinds of, you just haven't seen what's possible yet because you're just seeing this one way, this one thing that you can get irritated by and put all of your energy into, because that's easier than not knowing and having to figure it out as you go.
I love that. And what you said about we don't even know what's possible yet. So just being like open to the possibility and being comfortable with what might be unknown and the uncertainty, which is its own kind of thing. Um, Really good. So I have a few questions that came in earlier, so I'm going to bring those up. And anybody who's watching live, again, feel free to throw your questions in the chat and we can talk to Jocelyn live on it. So here's another one. For someone who has no tools at all to curb negative self talk, where does one start?
Oh, the my annoying first response is you do have the tools. They're in you. You have them. You just don't believe it yet. Everybody does. I think if you can think of, first of all, you're alive. So you're doing something right. You're here. You haven't messed up so much that you're dead. Um, although we all die, so maybe it's not messing up. Anyway, could go on forever in these riddles, but if you feel like you don't have the tools, one thing you can do is just if you can take an inventory of things that you are doing right, okay, and just start super simple. And it can sound ridiculous, but I know how to walk. If you're able to walk, I know how to walk. Think of that. Just the fact that you're able to walk, if you have this gift. You are the only species on the planet who can walk long distances and who can walk while eating. So that alone is a marvel. You're like, I can put one step in front of the other. Yes, it might sound simple, but this is a small miracle. Or I know how to feed myself. I know how to get out of certain predicaments. You can start getting a little more deep or complicated of a time that you overcame something at work or in your life that was really challenging. If you play sports, you learned how to coordinate and, put a ball into a hole or whatever sport you're playing. So just take stock of the stuff that you are doing right, and you can just start really, really simple. And the other thing is sort of what we talked about earlier is just see if you can get to neutral when you're having these really negative thoughts. If you could just like write them out, say what the thought is. If the thought is a really painful one, like when I was a kid, I am a loser. I have nothing of value to say, so therefore I am of no value. Write that out. That you're staring at the face of your biggest fear often when you do that, and just sit with that. Just acknowledge that that is a story. You have the power to change. It doesn't feel like it yet. It's really painful, but you do. And just start writing alternatives. If you can't believe the extreme opposite of that, then just again, I am a person. Or you could say people are valuable. Therefore, I am valuable. But just try to find something that can give your brain that little bit of, okay, I can buy into that, baby steps. And eventually you just reinforce that, and remember that the resistance will keep coming on. The brain will keep wanting to pull you back because it's established over time. It's like this grand canyon of thinking. This is the easiest path. So your brain's primary job is just to keep you alive. And it's using past information to project future results, which is in and of itself kind of crazy. But it's a story making machine. So it's going to come back to, oh, no, here's why this is impossible. Here's why this is a bad idea. Do not enter that improv room. Just realize and recognize that that's going to keep coming back. And you're doing a great job. You asked that question. That alone shows you have the tools.
I love the idea of noticing the small miracles. So good. Walking. First of all, I have a question for you. Are we really the only species that can walk and eat at the same time?
I think so. I was going on a rabbit hole of walking experts, and I was
I
like, that
never
is
heard of that before. I'm
hilarious.
like, wait, what? Like
Yeah.
I'm gonna be walking the street eating, be like, this is a miracle. We are the only people who can do this. So good.
Yeah.
And then there's something you brought up about the pain, and I want to touch on that because I think that is probably where people avoid going the most, and that's why it stops us from doing the work. Even myself, like I've been uncovering some of my own brain stories, even just this week. And some of it has been so painful. And I want to ask if you have any tips in that moment when you're really drowning in the pain of what you just realized. Like maybe someone said something and triggered you, or maybe something happened and it triggered you. Maybe you saw something on social media and it triggered you. And now you became aware of a story in your mind or a belief, right? And and it's just like, first of all, you're probably rejecting it initially because you're like, oh, no, 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 this is not happening right now, or this is not what I believe. Like to even what you said, like to realize that you think you're a loser is so painful, right? So when we are facing these stories and in that moment when you feel like you're drowning and it feels like a bunch of knives like stabbing into your like entire body, how do you handle that moment? What can you do in those moments of pain?
Breathe. Um, seriously, it's like,
Yeah.
again, it's talk of small miracles. Um, they even use it in some military training. I think it's the 4-4-4 pattern. I could be mistaken, but that's basically the inhaling for 4 counts, holding for 4 counts, and exhaling for 4 counts, and just repeating that 3 or 4 times at least. Nothing like breathing. Breathing is literally calming your system, bringing you back to equilibrium, bringing like oxygenating the blood and making sure that, your organs have what they need. That's a very initial step. That can be, centering, recalibrating. Doesn't solve the problem,
Right.
but we're also calling it a problem. We spend so much time trying to avoid and resist pain, so we have a hard time handling it when it arises. It's just like the, pandemic or the volcano. It's like this stuff is going to happen. So how can we get better at it? But when you're in that moment, yeah, the breathing and really seeing if you can tune into, instead of again trying to flee from the hard things to feel, where are you feeling them literally in your body? Does your chest feel tight? Just bringing your attention and awareness to this can help, again, like it just has a calming effect. um and that can help you relax into it a little bit. I often think of surfing analogies. uh I grew up surfing, and it's like when you're tumbling around in the whitewash. It's like wave came down, crashed on you, or you're just learning and you're just blah, spinning. You have no idea which way is up, and you're thrashing. You're trying to fight against it, just like if you're trying to fight the current. It's not until you relax, you kind of go with it, that you can ease out of it, right? Or you can at least find which way is up. Come up for air. The more you fight it, the harder it gets.
Ooh, that's good. The more you fight it, the harder it gets. So really just allowing yourself to feel and breathe and be with it in that moment.
Yeah.
So good. And why does negative self-worth sometimes feel rewarding? Like, why do we kind of move towards it or feel kind of addicted to it? Why do we choose it over choosing something that might feel better?
Yeah, it's just like any addiction, right? It's like this stuff feels good. I'm gonna keep getting this little dopamine drip or morphine drip. We like trained ourselves to acknowledge that this is reality. So we've trained ourselves to think that this is true, and I'm gonna dig my heels and this I'm gonna keep feeling shitty, and I like it. You don't really, but you tell yourself you do. And again, it's because your brain is like, I'm going to go for the known thing. That's the easy thing. I'm
Okay.
going to train you to get a dopamine drip.
Yeah, because I was like,
For,
why do we like it? So it's just because it's familiar, maybe?
I think so. And again, maybe there's some element of like a bit of masochism there, but yeah, I think it's like mostly because it's familiar, and it's like coming back to, I'm going to reward you for doing something that we know keeps you alive, right? Even if
Mhm.
it
We know
is,
we're safe here. Ooh, that resonates. Like this feels safe, but anything
yeah,
else is unknown. We don't know if we're gonna die there. So, okay.
exactly. Yeah. It's like clinging to the blankie.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. Even though it's got like, smallpox. Oof. Like,
Oh gosh.
that's my brain. There it goes.
And there it goes again. Awesome. So good. I just like yesterday when if you guys didn't catch Dr. K's yesterday, I was like, I'm gonna have to watch this 5 times. And same thing with Jocelyn. Like, and I love how you just say everything with such ease. Like it just rolls off of you. It's just such a gift that you have. So I'm so glad that we were really able to dive deep into this brain stuff. You have definitely made me more fascinated in brains than I was before. And I'm excited to watch this multiple times too in this next week. So thank you for being here today and sharing all this wisdom with us. So before we do closing thoughts, I would love to have you share where people can find you and tell them about your tiny tips because y'all, I love this girl's tiny tips. They are amazing. They're first of all, the video is just so good. They're so entertaining. They're really short. They're like a minute long and they're so informative. So tell us all the things.
Oh yeah. So tiny tips. Where's my little brain? Yeah, this guy. this inspired me. And I got, no, I have this other fun one, but Tiny Tips is the first time that I'm like creating content. I'm telling my own stories, right? It's the first time I'm really creating content that is for me. It's not like hiding behind some brand. So I'm so it's very satisfying. Yeah, but they're all about 2-ish minutes and all about from the marvel of walking to how do you handle chaos or embracing boredom. How do you help your brain deal with this stuff, tell better stories so you can do create and experience more of what you really want. So you can find those on YouTube. My channel there is Jostle Them, JOCELTHEM, and also jostle them on Instagram, or you can find me jocelynbrady.com and Jocelyn Brady on LinkedIn, where I'm most active on LinkedIn and Instagram. So hit me up there, send me a message. I have a free flip the script, reframing your membrane, kind of interactive tool you could use on my website at jocelynbrady.com. You'll see a little bar at the top and just hit that, and you could take that little exercise to see how you can flip the script and look at thoughts in a new way. The very first step before you take consistent action.
Awesome. And actually, I didn't realize, but we do have a few questions. So let's dive into those before we wrap up. So Randy says, your talk brought up a question, and I probably couldn't have come up with it on my own. So thank you. My question comes from my efforts to build a speaking career. This brain talk brings up something for me. I deal with a difficult past, some things that have happened and others I am responsible for. I have owned them personally, but to speak about it, there is a heavy sense of judgment which holds me back. On the other hand, I've owned my behavior so much on the stage that it comes across as being egotistical. I did this and that, but now look how well I'm doing. There is a balance that I need to strike without being afraid on one hand and being a victim on the other hand.
Ooh, yeah. That's a loaded question. So I think vulnerability there, it sounds like a good word, a good direction where you can be soft when you're talking about your traumas or, things that you've learned from. And and then have some swagger and have some fun with the stuff you've been able to do. And maybe it could help to navigate between these and just experiment. I mean, think of this all as something you're playing with. It's all just one crazy experiment. All Joss, as I like to say. Um, and how can you maybe how would you even explain these things to an adorable kitten or a child um, that doesn't understand some of the concepts you're talking about yet? How would you just explain this in a really soft, compassionate way? Maybe imagining different audiences. So you're not trying to, uh, maybe overcompensate by having, a large amount of swagger. But maybe you're just judging the swagger too. Maybe that's part of your shtick and part of your show. Um, but yeah, I think my top advice, and it's a loaded question. I think could deserve a whole conversation around. But
Yeah,
how can you play with this more?
beautiful. And Brett is asking, would you acknowledge how your creativity has allowed you to experience personal liberty?
How my creativity has allowed me to experience personal liberty.
Yeah, so I think what he's saying here is the creativity potentially that we're tapping into with our brains. Like, how does that make us feel free inside?
Mm. Yeah, I just did my last tiny tips was on chaos. And speaking of resistance and wanting to give up, I wanted to give up like a million times making this thing. So sometimes they're so frustrating because even then my brain's like, no, I have an idea of what a perfect thing could be. Perfection, right? The enemy of great. Um, and it was looking at what does chaos even mean? And I started asking my super smart like mathematician friends, like what is chaos theory? What are these concepts? I don't understand this. And I came to the conclusion or realization It sounds antithetical actually saying I came to a conclusion, but that is I don't know. I can't really understand it, but I know sort of know what it looks like. I can imagine it as again like kind of the whitewash. And then the opposite of that would be stagnation where nothing can really grow. And in the middle is the crest where the wave happens, where you can like you have this really fun ride. So being creative is about embracing that chaos and uncertainty and just allowing yourself to play and flow and have fun and make out of what looks like insanity sometimes.
Oh, I love that. Creativity helps you with all the chaos and uncertainty. So good. I never thought about creativity like that. Very nice. So,
Yeah.
any closing thoughts that you'd like to share today? So, today we talked about the BS of self worth. It's all brain stories. What would you like everybody to know and leave with today?
I would just say, I mean, go out, be kind to yourself. Remember that life is freaking short, man. And so, uh, how can you make the most out of it? Tell people you love them. And the number one regret of the dying is that they didn't honor what they really wanted and they weren't being true to themselves and they didn't tell people how they really felt. So go do those things. They probably feel scary. And but if you want to go paint or do an art gallery or put on a film festival or stuff that sounds crazy, know that that stuff is possible. It might not turn out how you expect, but never really expect anything. Go do those things. Like, please, please, please go do the things you would most regret doing on your deathbed. You most regret not doing on your deathbed. Please go do that.
Ah, so good. Oh my goodness. I got all the chills and teary eyed from that. No regrets on the deathbed. Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Jocelyn, for being here today. This has been such a beautiful talk. The replay will be getting sent out, everybody, so look out for that. I want to invite you to sign up for the summit. We have 1 day left. If you would like to be on all the updates and get the replays and all the good stuff, you can sign up at aditicreative.com/summit. That's ADITI creative.com/summit. So this is a 3-day summit. We had Dr. K yesterday talking about stopping comparing yourself. When you sign up, you will get the replay for that right away. And today's Jocelyn's talk on the BS of self-worth. And tomorrow I will be doing a talk all about how to hate yourself less and like yourself more. I talk about how self-love is such a buzzword, right? We talk about it all the time. You hear about it all the time. But what do you do when you're not really feeling yourself? So we're going to be talking about that tomorrow. Thank you so much for tuning in live. We will be live at the same time tomorrow on the same link. We'll be streaming on Facebook and on Zoom. So please come join us. And if you want to submit any questions in advance for tomorrow's talk, feel free to do that by sending it to me. And I will catch you guys tomorrow. Thank you so much. Day 2, we made it.
Aloha.